it was Whole Foods. We're going to move to California. We're going to go to Palo Alto. It's just outside of San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I'm going to live in San Francisco. And we never been here. I had went to visit a friend in LA a couple of times with my buddy Russ. The two of us had driven cross country to go visit our friend. So I'm like, oh, California's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I didn't really know anything about Northern California. And then I got here and I'm like, Palo Alto's nowhere close to San Francisco.
That was Cheese Plus owner Ray Bair. I'm Jeff. Welcome to Storied San Francisco, a weekly podcast where San Franciscans from all walks of life share their stories, and you get to know your neighbors. In this podcast, Ray traces his story back to his grandparents' farm in Kansas, where he spent several summers when he was a kid. He would return for the school year in Dallas, where, as a teenager, he wound up selling car stereos. That gig brought him to Austin, where he ended up playing in a band and working at Whole Foods. And years later, that job at Whole Foods led him to the Bay Area. Here's Ray.
My family were farmers. So both my parents came from Kansas.
Where about in Kansas? Southern.
Between our Kansas City and Independence, in the southern part of the state, above Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah. And I was very fortunate as a kid. My great-grandparents had a farm, and they had a cattle farm, and they raised feed crops. So literally Friday afternoon, the last day of the school year, my parents would take my brother and I up to Kansas, and they would bring us back 3 months later after the summer break was over. Wow. And so I got to live on the farm and then kind of shuttled back and forth between my great-grandparents who had the farm and both of sets of my grandparents who lived, in relatively close communities. So I had a really, interesting opportunity to do that. So our family were all farmers, but so they had, gone in they weren't scholars anymore. They'd gone in a different direction. Okay. And so I got to grow up with this unique, very unique time in the early 70s, mid 70s, rural America, and then go back home to Dallas to go to school in a big city with, all the cool stuff that a big city has. So it was a really very interesting sort of dichotomy of sorts of two ways of living. I have an older brother who's about 5 years older than me. Mm-hmm. So he was old enough that he could work, a lot of actually in the fields and do a lot of those things. Mm-hmm. But I was too little to do a lot of those things. So I ended up spending a lot of time with my great-grandmother.
Okay.
And, so my sort of passion for food and my knowledge about food really started there.
Okay.
We would go out and get eggs, from the hen house. We would go fishing in the creek and catch fish and cook them for lunch. She taught me how to slaughter animals and make berry preserves that we would go pick ourselves. We had a garden, and I just loved it. I loved, she was just so cool, right? And she was so old and wrinkly for a little kid like me, But of course, she spoiled me, Yeah. So I just loved being out there, and would go out with my great-grandpa at night, and we'd go out back down behind the house to the creek, and we'd take a bar of soap and a towel, and that's where we would take our baths at night. It's like that. Right. So, and you'd go up to the check stand at these old grocery stores, and there'd be 3 checkbooks on the counter because there were 3 main banks in that community. Right. And you just filled out your own name. So it was just a very different way. Very different time and place. And then you go, back home to Dallas, and, freeways and people and tall buildings and, all this other stuff.
And actually paying for shit.
Yeah, exactly. Having to pay for stuff, and you're like, but yeah, it was a great was a great way of growing up, I think, and I think we're all probably fairly nostalgic about our childhoods and how different the world was, 50 years ago or 45 years ago for somebody my age, 45 years ago, just a different type of world. So we were a working class, lower middle class, upper poor class of family.
An agrarian.
When I was a kid, I never went on vacation. I never, ever, I took one trip on an airplane when I was a kid to visit my grandparents who had moved to Oregon.
Okay.
I was actually born in Oregon.
Oh.
So my parents lived there for a very brief period of time. They left Kansas. They went to Oregon when I was either conceived there or I was born there, right?
Right.
And then they left Oregon, but they went there because my grandparents, my father's parents, were there working. Okay. My father hated Oregon. It was Southern Oregon on the coast, in a town called Gold Beach.
Okay.
And he hated the weather.
Foggy,
it was
rainy.
Foggy. Yeah, it was very much probably like it is here.
Yeah.
Probably a lot more rainy there where it was, I think. And so he was disillusioned. And actually, my father had a lot of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of jobs. And so his satisfaction as an employee was always a topic of conversation.
Okay.
I remember as a child. So, but I was baby, so I don't remember anything about Oregon. And again, that was a vacation, but it was really about going to see grandma and grandpa.
Right.
So every trip we took was to see the grandparents. Yeah, I think I was just I was the sort of the independent one in the family. My brother, he liked to stay closer to home, and he actually still lives in the Dallas area,
right?
To this day. And so my first venture out was to move from Dallas to Austin, and it's an interesting story. So,
what year would that have been?
1984.
Okay.
I think it was I graduated in 1983 from high school. And I started going to community college. I was a really good student in a number of areas, and I was a horrific. I had truancy issues.
Okay.
I couldn't get to class until noon.
Right.
So those last periods of the day, science, I was really good at. English, I was very good at.
By virtue of showing up.
But mathematics was first thing in the morning.
Oh no!
And I actually didn't do well. Had to take basic arithmetic 2 years in a row, and summer school to get my to graduate.
Which for us in Texas was at least there's air conditioning.
Yeah, at least there's air conditioning. Well, the irony of that, the absolute irony, is that I'm a math whiz. But I had this really great counselor, and I think a lot of us maybe had similar experiences. And she was really sweet. I cannot remember her name, but I do remember that she had a fear of driving over bridges. And we were on some sort of a trip, and she was like, oh my God, we're going over a bridge. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but anyway, she was very, very helpful. She got me some sort of a scholarship of sorts to Texas Christian University.
TCU in Fort Worth. Yep.
And, but then I was like, I don't think I want to go there. I don't think this is quite what I want to do, because I was like, I'm not really, I don't really want to, I was like rebellious. I'm like, screw religion. I'm not going to a religious school,
Yeah.
kind of, that was sort of my attitude. So I went to community college. My parents were like, just stay at home and go to community college. And, like I said, neither of my parents had a college education. So never was any training for going to a university or
Right.
there wasn't any of that with my parents. I'll relate the story. So I watched this movie last night, and this relates to the story I'm going to tell you. It was called American Honey. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I haven't seen it. My fiance has. We were just talking about it yesterday. Sasha Lane, I think is her name.
Yeah, and Shia LaBeouf, right?
Yes.
In there. And so the core of the story is that these kids there's a group of kids that come together, young adults and teenagers that are traveling around selling magazines, subscriptions, right? So they go to, they do that. Well, so I took a job. My mother found this job for me because I play the guitar and I wanted to be a musician and all these things. She saw this job posting in the newspaper.
Still in Dallas.
It's still in Dallas. And she says, it says, you like money and music? Apply here.
Wow. Talk about low-hanging fruit.
Right? So she's like, this is perfect for you. You should take this job. And what the job was selling car stereos out the trunk of the car. Right?
Oh my God.
It's the same story what these kids are doing with these magazines, right? So I'm watching this thing last night and I'm fascinated. So I was really good at it. So I had to bring my guitar every day as collateral, and then they would send you out with an inventory of goods, and you'd go out to job sites and industrial parks, and you'd be like, hey, I got a great deal for you guys. You need an equalizer for your stereo. Now remember, this is the early 80s.
Yep.
It's very different,
Oh, yeah.
and you could you'd buy speakers and stereo equipment for your car. It was a big deal.
And the people who had those, they were special. Not everyone had them.
And everyone had them. Well, they were all crap, right? So they all broke all the time. Right. Your car, you had to put, you put a tape in, either whether it's an 8-track or cassette, and then you had to put a quarter in to make sure that it would play right. You had to do these things. It was a very different world back then, right?
Yeah.
And so I got really good at it. I was, 18 and a half, 19 years old, and charming, energetic kid, and
slinging stereos.
Yeah, slinging those stereos. So we'd have to go in every morning, and we'd do this juice get fired up kind of like routine where we do calisthenics and talk about how much money we're going to make.
Yes.
I swear to God, you watch that movie, you're going to see it. It is absolutely what was happening. They said, we're going to go. So this is in Dallas. We're going to go to Austin. We don't have a market in Austin. Would anybody like to go? And I'm like, ooh, me. I want to go. And I had some friends from high school who were living down there that I'd stayed in touch with. And so I went down there for like a 3 or 4 day, Austin, Dallas, it's like a 3-hour drive, something like that.
Yeah.
And went down there for a few days and busted completely. My winning streak was over. I couldn't sell anything. I had to borrow like $10 from the guys that we were sleeping, like 4 of us in a single like Motel 6 room, just so that I could have a little bit of food, and to eat. But while I was there, I looked up my buddies.
Okay.
And they're like, dude, you got to move down here, So went home and I said to my parents, all right, I'm out. I'm going to quit school. I'm going to move to Austin. I got a buddy who's got a room for me. I'm going to stay there. And so made my way initially out of Dallas into Austin, where I lived for 4 or 5 years before I came out to California.
Yeah, that's the thing about Austin is it's had that draw, especially within the state of Texas.
Yeah.
As I'm a little younger than you, I'm 46. As long as I can remember being alive.
Yeah, back then, I paid, I think, like $90 a month for my rent. Like everything was cheap. It was, it was completely laid back, hotter than hell. So you're just forced to, that Texas thing is, it does kind of slow you down. But when you're in your early 20s and you have no money, you just kind of make time for yourself. I went back to school. I went to community college. I tried going to UT. That didn't go well for me. And then in the middle of it, I started working. I always worked when I was there somehow. And at some point, I think around 85 or 86, I started with Whole Foods Market.
And this is when it was a very small store on Lamar, right, in a little shopping strip.
There were 5 stores.
Okay, already 5
at the time.
Okay.
There were 3 in Austin. There was 1 in Dallas and 1 in Houston when I started.
Okay.
And of course, it was very independent. It was independently owned. It wasn't publicly traded.
Right.
Nothing like it was now. And it was a very different experience. So this is sort of this. Now you're into the mid '80s. You still got this sort of down there, kind of this post-hippie kind of experience. Not exactly like it was in the 90s where, being a hippie was certainly really cool.
Right.
And we all had ponytails and things like that. But kind of hippie grunge as it was at that time. But yeah, it was a very, very different experience than
health food was it
what you think of Whole Foods today. And just very, very different. I remember it was some of the things that were really, the personal interactions were one thing, but there was some, the rules, right? So like the rule book, the culture was, you had to make sure that the clothes that you wore would cover up, like your private parts, right? Literally, that was kind of the code.
Minimum.
You had to wear a name badge, but you didn't have to put your name on it. And that was pretty much it. I think maybe closed-toed shoes, maybe.
Right, maybe.
I think I can't remember, but it was such an incestuous working environment of super passionate people, and that always was the thing that made that company so successful for so long, and probably still today, is that the people who are just deeply, deeply passionate about what they're doing, whether that's the drive to push the natural food industry forward or the drive for service. And but I was the accidental grocer. You know what I mean? This wasn't my life calling. Just sort of something I fell into, and we were surrounded by other people just like us. We were all kind of, misfits, for the lack of a better word, that given some autonomy and some feedback, which is what we really got a lot of. Like there was a lot of financial feedback about what we were doing there. You could really take somebody who didn't fit into other places, who didn't have an education, who could excel. And the company today still is filled with people like that who never got an education, not MBAs, but whip smart about business and relationships and commerce. And I had one friend in particular. He was a couple of years older than me. He taught me how to bend the rules of life to get what you wanted a little bit. Right?
All right.
So, but he, the big thing that he taught me, so he's a musician, I was a musician, and you could take your Pell Grant money and take it to the music store and buy yourself a new guitar.
Yes.
You can buy yourself a keyboard. So the next thing you know, I'm like getting all of this financial aid, living in a place where I don't really need it necessarily. So suddenly we found ourselves in a band. And we were recording music in our little apartment that we were in.
And you play guitar, you said?
Play the guitar and the keyboard, like a synthesizer. So I'm not a pianist or anything like that. So suddenly, we're a synth pop band, and we have one of the first early, Mac computers, and with the tiny little screen and the classic little all-in-ones, right? And we're making music, and and everybody's a musician in Austin or an
Right.
artist or something like that. And so
Yes.
suddenly I'm like kind of going to school. I'm working a little bit. I'm making some money. I'm living life, and I'm playing music and just having a good time. Soon after that, I moved to California, thinking that
Yeah.
I was going to start up a band and do all this stuff when I got here. But
Was that what attracted you to come here, or what?
no,
What
it was
was
a job offer. So it
Okay.
was job offer. It was Whole Foods. We're going to move to California. We're going to go to Palo Alto. It's just outside of San Francisco. I'm like, great. I'm going to live in San Francisco. Then we never been here. I had went to visit a friend in LA a couple of times with my buddy Russ. The two of us had driven cross country to go visit our friend. So I'm like, oh, California's really cool. And of course, I didn't really know anything about Northern California. And then I got here and I'm like, Palo Alto's nowhere close to San Francisco. You know, and then, oh my God, California's really expensive. You know, and California's very different, you know. Wow, this, you know, and so there was a posse of Texans that came out here from Houston, from Dallas, from Austin
For Whole Foods.
for Whole Foods to open that store. We just basically pulled everybody from within the organization.
What year would this have been?
1988. The store opened, I believe, at the first part of 89. You know, the one-day Gulf War?
Yeah.
89. I think that was the day we were supposed to open.
Okay.
I remember we had some sort of speech with one of the founders, Craig Weller, who was managing the store, and he was one of the original founders of the company. And I vaguely remember something about the war happening, and I'm like, what war? What are you talking about? You know, but I think for him, you know, he's probably, you know, in his 70s now. You know, he's relating it to like to Vietnam, or maybe even, you know, stories about his family from Korea or World War II or World War I, like that. So you know, it's kind of I do kind of remember it, but you know, I was a kid. I really wasn't paying attention to stuff, you know, kind of outside of my own initial periphery.
So did you move to San Francisco, or did you live somewhere down there?
I lived in Sunnyvale at first. So that's where I first landed. And so I stayed with some friends there.
That's kind of just northwest of San Jose, right?
It is. It's south of Palo Alto.
Kind of right where the peninsula begins. Yeah,
it's below below Moffett Field.
Right.
Yeah, over there. So and then I got into this really cool living situation in this Eichler in Palo Alto, and it was sweet. And there was a bunch of us there, and we had enchilada parties every weekend.
Oh, stop making me hungry. I'm already hungry talking with the owner of Cheese Plus. You can't just throw enchiladas in there.
We're homesick Texans, and I still am a homesick Texan after all these years of living.
Do you know about the site Homesick Texan?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Palo Alto was, it was just great. There was a bunch of us together in this.
Were your roommates all Whole Foods people?
Yeah, we all worked together.
Got it. Okay.
And there were various incarnations of relationships that came in and out of that living experience.
It was real world Palo Alto.
It was the real world Palo Alto. And we just had this great house, and it was just, it was very classic California. It was this Eichler house with a lemon tree in the backyard, and it was just like this kind of really quintessential experience that we had there. And then we moved the party from Palo Alto to Berkeley.
Okay. So
a year later, the Berkeley Whole Foods opens. So this sort of core group of us, kind of a lot of people left that first year. But there was a core group of maybe a dozen that stayed.
Okay.
And we got the Berkeley store open. So then we moved from this Eichler to this beautiful Berkeley Craftsman 2-story, incredible house that we were over off of Rock Ridge area, well, a little bit north, kind of, I can't remember the name of the neighborhood. It's College and Alcatraz. So I'm sure somebody will say, that's where I live, and it's called something, but I can't remember the name of it because that was in 1990. So that was a while ago. So we basically moved the party over there and, continue to sort of perfect our craft as retailers and as margarita makers.
I was going to say party animals.
It was party animals. And so now you're in the 90s. And so the hippie grunge things is starting to take off. Mm-hmm. Eventually the party ended because we all got older and needed to either, we needed to join the greater society.
Right.
And the thing is, it all goes back to work for me, right? I'm a worker. I've always worked. The only time I never worked was that I took a few months off from when I left my career at Whole Foods and started Cheese Plus.
Okay.
And so all my friends are all workers. And so it was all about work. And so at some point you realize, like, I got a skill. I'm really, I can do something with this. And there was that pivotal moment, I remember, because I was talking to my mother and I was like, yeah, I got to figure out what I'm doing with my life. And she's like, well, what have you been doing with your life?
Right.
And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, you work for a killer company. They like you. Like, you're going places. Like, you don't need to go back to school. You don't need to change your career path. Just do what you're doing.
Like, you don't need to look over there.
You don't need to look over there. You're already
right here. Yeah.
And that's when I realized, you know what? I am on the bus. I'm on the bus and I'm doing it. And I think a lot of us that I worked with, a lot of us that, we are still doing it, whether, there's a few that stayed with the organization, most of them have left, and almost to a T, to a single person, we're all independent entrepreneurs.
Okay. Some people doing food still? Or?
Restaurants, retail shops, record stores, all kinds of different stuff, marketing and design and PR and, all these different pieces that they might have done within the organization or become a part of it. Some of them are, real estate developers now for commercial businesses because they got a taste of that while they were there. And so at some point we all had to get, like our careers in line, and people started getting married. Some people were having kids and divorces and more kids, more marriages, and changing their identities, and all these different things that were happening. And so I think it's a fairly typical story for a lot of folks of, like, your 20s, you have multiple personalities to you, right? You're a child, you're a student, you're a roommate, you're a friend, you're this and that, and then you're like, okay, my new identity is, spouse or parent or boss or, those types of things. So
did you go straight from Berkeley Whole Foods to Cheese Plus, or when did you actually move to San Francisco?
Oh, I moved to San Francisco in proper. So I moved around the Bay Area. So I went from Berkeley to Mill Valley.
Okay. Bouncing around.
Probably 93 or 94, I moved to San Francisco.
That was Ray Bair. Join us again Thursday for part 2, when Ray will talk about his move to San Francisco, different jobs he had at Whole Foods before the company went public, and how he left the company and opened Cheese Plus. Just a reminder that Cheese Plus is open during shelter in place, so please visit if you're able to. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me, Jeff Hunt. Our website is storiedsf.com, where you can browse more than 100 episodes and help support us by buying merch from our store. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If that's Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please do us a quick favor and rate and review the show. And if you have any feedback or people you think should be on the podcast, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy and stay safe.